Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Krista Wetmore, and you're watching the Money Mindset Show. I hope the technology works today. I'm in my home office, or not home office, I'm in my office in St. John, and we have a brand new webinar system, video system. So I thought I would try it out. Mind you, up until about 5 minutes ago, I didn't think it was going to work. So if for some reason I get feedback on this and you're not able to see or hear me, I'll just re-record this program and put it on the site on my Facebook page. So today I thought I would talk about designated beneficiaries for either RRSP or a RRIF. And for those of you who don't know what a RRIF is, just very quick and simple explanation. A RRIF is basically an RRSP that is converted into a different type of product that allows you to receive a regular income stream. So an RRSP, if you haven't touched it, you have to convert it into a RRIF the year that you turn 71. So that is mandated that you have to change that. But you can switch it over earlier if you've decided to retire prior to the age of 71 and you wanted to receive a regular income stream. So that's what I mean by RRIF. So one of the questions that often comes up from clients, and I'm not sure if this is truly understood or not, when should you designate as an individual as a beneficiary of your RRSP or your RRIF, and when should you designate your estate to be the the estate rather than individual beneficiary. So I'm just going to jump in and give you a couple of examples that should be able to explain this. So say, for example, I am married to John and I have a $500,000 RRSP, and I want John to receive that money at the time of my death. So I'm going to put John as the beneficiary for the RRSP. So let's say, for example, I did pass away. So what would happen to that money? That $500,000 would automatically flow over to John. There'd be no withholding taxes on it. And the benefit to him is to defer tax. So that means that he doesn't have to pay tax on it until such time that he starts withdrawing money from the RRSP. So in that case, it's pretty straight and clear cut. The benefit to him as well, it doesn't flow through the estate. If you have money that flows through the estate, in order for it to be settled, depending on the amount, it may include probate fees and costs. In the province of New Brunswick is usually not that expensive, but that is an additional cost because it does have to go through the court system. So what that process looks like is basically there's checks and balances there from the court just to ensure that your wishes and your will are being followed and carried out according to the law. So that's what that is. So in the case that an example I just explained about my husband receiving the $500,000 RRSP and being the beneficiary to that, a little caveat here, and this is a key point that a lot of people may not understand. And if you are we call it a qualified beneficiary. So if you are a spouse or in a common law relationship. So again, my video last week explained some of the similarities and differences between common law and marriage. This is one of these similarities. So common law relationship, a common law partner and a spouse are treated the same when it comes to beneficiaries. Or if you have a financially dependent child or grandchild, it would work in the same example where the funds in the RSP upon your death would flow to without any tax implications today on that. So let's use the example of what would have a tax implication today. So let's say, for example, that I want to name my sister as of my RRSP. What I'm going to do in this is upon my $100,000 is transferred to her. There's no withholding taxes on it. So keep that in mind, no withholding taxes. The $500,000 gets transferred to my sister. But, and this is a big, big, big but, which is often misunderstood, and this is where you can get into some serious problems. That transfer is considered a deemed disposition. So what happens is your estate would have to claim the $500,000 in income. So basically the estate, and according to the regulations, it's as if you were drawing that $500,000 in one lump sum. So the estate has to claim the $500,000 on the income tax return, which would generate about a $250,000 tax bill. So if the estate, for example, does not have the money to pay the tax bill of $250,000, then CRA may go after my sister for that $250,000 bill. And if, for example, because estates can often take, depending on how complicated and how large they are, they can take a while to settle. So my sister could be, if she wasn't aware of the tax implications of that, and say, for example, she spent $500,000 and is not able to pay the $250,000 bill, that would get her into serious problems. So in that case, that's a very good example of why you may want the estate to be the beneficiary of the of your RSP, because in that way the money flows to the estate. The estate will ensure that the taxes are paid, and then depending on the instructions, everything would be divvied up according to the will. So it's just more of a controlled process versus your beneficiary being in a position where they may have a large tax bill and not fully understand what those implications could be. So just moving on to, I just want to talk about, there's another type of an example, and I can think of recently where a client had wanted to ensure that the estate was divided among the 3 children equally. So for example, let's pretend that I have 3 adult children. They are not financially dependent on me, so they are not a qualified beneficiary. And let's say, for example, I have $400,000 in GICs and I have $200,000 in an RRSP. And let's just, for argument's sake, say that I put one of my children, child A, as a beneficiary for the RRSP. And what would happen upon my death? That $200,000 would flow through to that child, my child A, and the estate would have to claim that $200,000 in income, and then that would generate a $100,000 tax bill. So the $400,000 GIC that I wanted to be equally split between child B and C, my other 2 children, would be affected, because the $400,000 less the $100,000 tax bill would leave $300,000 split between my 2 children. And if I wanted to be fair to my children, 2 children would get $150,000 and 1 child would get $200,000 with no tax implications on it. So again, you may want to think about that. And some individuals don't want to be fair. That's fine as well. But in the case that I'm using, or the example I'm using today on that, that would be a great example of when it would make sense to designate the estate as the beneficiary. The estate would pay all the taxes, and then the disbursements would be made according to your wishes. So I'll just jump into another topic as well that I see quite often now, especially with blended families. And this can be, it can be a little tricky at times. So I'll give you an example. So let's say I'm no longer married to John, but now I'm married to Bill. And I want, upon my death, I want Bill to receive a steady income. And but upon his death, I don't want that money going to his family. I want it to go to my 3 grown children. So in that case, I may want to look at setting up a trust and then have a certain amount being paid to Bill on a monthly basis to cover his expenses. And then upon his death, then the capital can go to the grown children. The only disadvantage to that is from a taxation standpoint, because if you're putting the money, you're setting up a trust, it is a deemed disposition. So the taxes have to be paid on that RRSP. Then the estate could be getting into a large tax bill. So for a financial planning strategy that I like is, let's look at the situation, and perhaps if we want to have some money going into Bill, put him as the beneficiary on the RSP, so it flows through to him on a tax deferral basis, so he doesn't have to pay, or the estate doesn't have to pay income tax on it today. The other benefit to that situation would be perhaps looking at a insurance policy and using that upon death to flow through to the 3 children on a tax-free basis. So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at different situations. But again, I just want to give you some food for thought. So when you're thinking about putting or naming a beneficiary on an RSP or a RRIF, it's really important to think through the different strategies. Make sure that you are picking somebody who is aware of what you're doing, especially if they are not one of those qualified beneficiaries, being a spouse, common law partner, financially dependent child, or grandchild. So I was not going to talk about locked-in accounts, but I think I am. I'm just going to touch on it just for a second, in case you do have a locked-in account. So a locked-in account, there's different types, but basically in a nutshell, it's a pension. So if you work for a company for a number of years and you're no longer working for them, your pension, you're able to transfer that and have it locked in until such time that you retire. So easy peasy, that's done. In most jurisdictions, those locked-in plans are either provincially or federally regulated. And in most cases, a spouse, not common law, a spouse has entitlement rights to the pension, even if the beneficiary name has not necessarily been designated. So that's something you need to be aware of. And actually, I was speaking with somebody in my office here this morning who is an expert. I call her an expert in pensions and locked-in pensions in particular. So I might ask her to come on my show and we can have a separate discussion about that. A couple little caveats about the beneficiaries before I forget. There's a couple different scenarios that I usually caution clients on, and one is designating minors as a beneficiary. So if you have a young child and you want them to receive the RSP money, a couple things to keep a couple things you need to keep in mind. First is they will not have access to that money until they become age of majority. So whether that's 18 or 19, depending on what province that you're living in. The second little thing it's not a little thing, but something I do caution people on, $5,000 RSP is significantly different than a $500,000 RRSP. And if you had a minor designated as a beneficiary, just think about that for a second and what would happen at 18 or 19 years old if you were to receive a lump sum of a significant amount of money. And, we know that, typically at that age that there could be concerns as far as how they would manage that money. So again, just from that standpoint, may not be a good thing to do. Something you could do is set up a trust or somebody that you trust, an advisor, to oversee lump sum payments going to the child as they age. So for example, you could set up a trust, and at ages 25, 30, and 35, that you would have 3 separate payouts. And again, you want to ensure that you're setting the children up for success as well, that they're not going to be, that they will be able to manage the funds appropriately. The other thing that I do caution clients on as well is naming too many beneficiaries. And the reason for this, and one of the examples I had used about, so for example, if I didn't have a spouse and I had 3 adult children and I wanted the money to go to them. So if you're trying to name 3, 4, or 5 children on your as a beneficiary of your RRSPs, then you're getting into some taxation concerns. There could be implications, obviously, from a taxation standpoint of the estate, as well as the beneficiaries that you've designated. So again, just from a control perspective, it may make sense to have the estate designated versus a number of beneficiaries. So again, hopefully that's open your eyes and help explain some different situations as far as when you should put a individual as a beneficiary on your RSP or RIF versus your estate, because there are very many different scenarios, and in each situation should be tailorized to you. So again, thanks so much for watching my show, and thank you so much for those of you who have sent in some recommendations of different topics I can speak to. So I look forward to talking about some group plan benefits for small business owners, and I'll be talking about vehicle loans and leasing, as well as I have a guest speaker who will be joining me the next couple of weeks, and we'll be talking about building your credits. So how do you build a good credit score? What works well? Likewise, what are some things that you should not do that would bring down your credit score? So again, any other topics, please feel free to send them in. Likewise, if you have any questions on anything I've talked about today, please feel free to reach out to me. Until next week, we'll see you then. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the sunshine, and I'm hoping to get out of my office here fairly soon and go outside and enjoy the warm weather. So we'll see you again next week, folks. Bye-bye.